One day I came across this headline: species that survive in acid pits in space under permafrost. And I was like, wait, what? This sounds like the summary of an episode of The Twilight Zone, not a scientific paper. But they are talking about real species, real places, and most importantly, real data. So let's see what the science actually says about Earth's most extreme survivors. I am a science journalist and host of a science podcast. This is a series where I try to answer one question using only the best available evidence. And you can check out more episodes on our website. The question for this episode is, how do organisms survive in extreme environments? Okay, here's the background. First, we need to define what we mean by extreme environments. Then we need to find some examples. For the purposes of this episode, I will consider an environment to be extreme if the conditions there prevent most life from surviving. For example, we know that most animal species cannot survive in highly acidic environments, like pH 1. We also know that most animals cannot survive in the vacuum of space, nor the near absence of oxygen in its place. And we know that most organisms cannot survive under the permanently frozen layers of ground called permafrost. These are 3 of our examples of extreme environments. Now let's look at the evidence. Here are 3 studies that together give us a pretty good idea of how life might survive in these extreme environments. In their natural habitats, item no. 1. Let's start with the acid pits. These are located in the Danakil depression in northern Ethiopia. They are created by geothermal activity, which releases sulfur dioxide gas. That gas reacts with water and oxygen to form sulfuric acid, which then collects in pools on the ground, creating these colorful acid lakes. Their pH ranges from 0 to 1. These pools vary in temperature from roughly 25 degrees Celsius to 75 degrees Celsius. So it's quite hot there. Now, this is very hostile for most life forms, but intriguingly, microbial mats have been found growing in the hottest and most acidic parts of the Danakil sulfur springs. So researchers decided to culture those microbes and determine what makes them so resilient. They collected 16 microbial strains from different parts of the springs, including the extremely acidic and hot ones, and also moderate ones, just to have a comparison group. They grew them all in labs at various temperatures and pH levels, and then measured their growth using a spectrophotometer, which basically measures how much light passes through the solution, and thus how cloudy, which correlates to the amount of bacteria. They found that the bacteria from the most extreme pools, the most acidic and hot ones, were able to grow at temperatures up to 60 degrees Celsius and in pH levels between 0 and 4. Their optimum growth was at 45 degrees Celsius and pH 2. Now, this study has some limitations. First, the authors acknowledge that the lab conditions are not exactly the same as the natural ones. And second, these are only 16 strains. However, the fact that these strains come from the same geographic location means that they likely share similar mechanisms for surviving the harsh conditions. So for now, we can safely say that these microbes can survive at least in their local extreme environment. Item no. 2. Let's move on to space. Now, we know that living things need oxygen to survive. And the vacuum of space does not have any oxygen. It is also full of harmful radiation. So it might seem impossible for any living thing to survive in space. But maybe it's not that impossible. It turns out that there's an organism that lives part of its life cycle in extreme conditions similar to space. This is the nematode worm called Aphelinchoides saprostreptus. It usually lives in soils and feeds on fungi. But females can enter a state called cryptobiosis. In this state, they slow their metabolism down so much that they become almost undetectable. They can survive without food for decades and in extreme temperatures and radiation. There have been several studies that look into the survival of these worms in space. In one study, researchers placed 1,000 worms in the upper atmosphere. Only 10% of them survived. Another study placed them in a slightly lower altitude, and 100 of them survived. And in another study, 45 of them survived after being sent to the International Space Station and spending 12 days in space. So, although we don't know exactly how these worms survive in space, we can say that they survive. Item No.3, let's finally get to the permafrost. Just like with the worms, the organisms living below the permafrost do not experience the freezing temperatures directly. They have developed a mechanism to avoid that. This is known as the production of antifreeze proteins. These proteins bind to ice crystals inside cells and prevent them from growing. Preventing ice formation is super important because as ice grows inside a cell, it damages the cell membrane and organelles such as mitochondria and ribosomes. The genes that produce those proteins are called ice structuring proteins, or ISPs. And scientists have studied them in a few model organisms like the Arctic fish. But they have also found these genes in bacteria living in the permafrost. Scientists have isolated 12 bacterial strains from Siberian permafrost. 6 of them produced ISPs and 6 did not. Then they exposed both groups to -8 degrees Celsius. After 2 days, only 33% of the bacteria that did not produce ISPs survived. All the bacteria that did produce them survived. So, it seems that the production of antifreeze proteins is a key to surviving the harsh conditions of the permafrost. Okay, we have found a pattern. In order to survive these extreme environments, organisms have evolved the ability to produce chemicals that help them cope with the challenges of their environment. Specifically, bacteria in acidic waters can grow at low pH levels thanks to adaptations that protect their cellular machinery from acid. Nematodes can slow their metabolism down so much that they can survive the vacuum of space. And bacteria in the permafrost can survive freezing temperatures thanks to their antifreeze proteins. The strength of this evidence is high because it comes from multiple studies that independently reach similar conclusions. However, there is still a lot of uncertainty here. We still do not know exactly what adaptations allow these bacteria to live in acidic waters. We also do not know exactly how these worms survive in space, nor do we know whether all the bacteria in the permafrost produce these antifreeze proteins. Okay, why does it matter that we know how organisms survive in extreme environments? Our planet is changing and getting warmer. As temperatures rise, many ecosystems will experience more droughts and heat waves, which will affect the organisms that live there. If we understand how life already survives in extreme environments, we could be better prepared to face the challenges ahead. Knowing how life survives in space could also help us decide whether we should pursue exploring other planets or whether we should focus on preserving our own planet. So to answer the question, how do organisms survive in extreme environments? I would say that the evidence indicates that organisms have evolved mechanisms that allow them to grow in acidic waters, survive in the vacuum of space, and resist freezing temperatures. But we still need more research to understand exactly how that happens. One precise next question would be, what are the molecular mechanisms that allow bacteria to grow in acidic environments? And that's a great question. Thank you for coming on this journey with me to learn something new about the world. And I'll see you next time.